Long before satellites guided ships across oceans, sailors trusted something far simpler. Compass. It was a remarkably small instrument. It made no noise, possessed no great strength. It couldn't calm storms, move mountains, or change the direction of the wind. Yet entire civilizations crossed unknown seas because of it. The remarkable thing about a compass was never its power. It was its consistency. A ship that drifted only 1 degree away from its intended course seemed perfectly safe at first. The difference was almost invisible. No one aboard noticed. The waves looked the same. The sky remained unchanged. The destination still felt close enough to imagine. But weeks later, that tiny 1-degree mistake became hundreds of miles. The ship never intended to become lost. It simply followed a direction that seemed harmless in the beginning. Life often works in exactly the same way. Most people believe wealth is created through dramatic moments. A brilliant investment, an extraordinary business idea, a lucky opportunity, a sudden promotion. These stories are exciting because they make success appear dramatic. Reality is usually much quieter. The greatest fortunes are rarely built in a single moment. They are shaped by thousands of small decisions that almost nobody notices while they are happening. A conversation instead of an argument. An investment instead of an impulse purchase. An hour spent learning rather than escaping. Choosing preparation instead of procrastination. Saving before spending. Creating before consuming. None of these choices feels extraordinary on a single day. Yet over years, they quietly become 2 entirely different lives. One life gradually expands. The other slowly contracts. Neither transformation happens overnight. Both begin with habits so ordinary they almost seem insignificant. That is why wealth often appears mysterious. People see the destination. They rarely see the direction. They admire the harvest without ever noticing the seasons of quiet planting that came before it. Perhaps that explains why financial success is so frequently misunderstood. We tend to celebrate visible achievements while overlooking the invisible disciplines that created them. The luxury home catches our attention. The years of disciplined investing do not. The thriving business becomes the headline. The countless evenings spent improving skills remain unseen. The confident investor appears fearless. The decades spent learning patience rarely receive applause. The world celebrates outcomes. Life rewards processes. There is an old story about 2 navigators who departed from the same harbor on the same morning. Both owned identical ships. Both possessed enough supplies. Both dreamed of reaching the same distant island. As they prepared to leave, an elderly harbor master approached them. He handed each captain an identical compass. One captain thanked him politely, tucked the compass into a drawer, and relied mostly on the stars whenever they were visible. If I'm close enough, he thought, I'll eventually find my way. The second captain examined his compass every day. Sometimes the needle required only the slightest correction. A degree to the east, half a degree to the west. The adjustments felt almost unnecessary. Many days the ocean looked perfectly calm, making the corrections seem almost foolish. Weeks passed. Storms arrived. Clouds hid the stars. Strong currents quietly pushed both ships off course. Months later, one vessel reached the island exactly as planned. The other arrived somewhere entirely different. The difference had never been the storms. Both captains faced the same weather. It had never been the quality of their ships. They began equally prepared. The difference had been the tiny corrections that one captain considered too small to matter. Life rarely changes because of one enormous decision. It changes because of the small decisions we repeat until they quietly become who we are. That truth is especially powerful when it comes to money. Financial freedom is often imagined as a destination waiting somewhere beyond the next promotion or investment. In reality, it begins much earlier. It begins with attention, with discipline, with curiosity, with responsibility. with the willingness to ask a simple question every single day. Is this decision moving me closer to the life I want, or quietly leading me somewhere else? Throughout this audiobook, we will not explore shortcuts. There are none. We will not search for secret formulas or magical investments. They do not exist. Instead, we will uncover something far more valuable: the invisible habits that quietly shape every financial future. Some of these habits build opportunity. Others silently destroy it. Some create freedom. Others create dependence. Many are so ordinary that people overlook them completely until years later, when the consequences become impossible to ignore. This journey is not about becoming rich overnight. It is about becoming the kind of person for whom wealth is a natural consequence rather than a constant pursuit. Because money, like a ship crossing an ocean, ultimately follows direction more faithfully than speed. And if your direction is wise, patient, and intentional, even the smallest daily correction can eventually carry you farther than you ever imagined. So before we begin, consider one quiet question. If every decision you make today became the blueprint for your future, where would your compass be leading you? The answer may be invisible today, but one day it will become your destination. Chapter 1. The Price of Attention. There is an old story about two merchants who opened identical shops on the same street. Both began with the same amount of money. Both sold the same products. Both dreamed of building prosperous businesses that would one day provide freedom for their families. Each morning, before opening their doors, an elderly traveler passed by carrying a lantern. The first merchant barely noticed him. He was too busy chatting with neighbors, reading rumors pinned to the town square, and listening to stories about distant kingdoms. He always knew who had won the latest tournament, which noble family had fallen into scandal, which actor was admired in the royal theater. People described him as well-informed, yet his shelves slowly emptied. His accounts became disorganized. Small opportunities quietly slipped away because his attention was constantly somewhere else. The second merchant also noticed the traveler. But instead of watching the crowds, he asked a simple question. "What does your lantern reveal?" The old traveler smiled. "It doesn't reveal anything. It only helps me see what already matters." The merchant thought about those words for years. Gradually, he realized the greatest difference between successful people and unsuccessful ones was rarely intelligence. It was attention. One person's attention built value. The other's was quietly consumed. Modern life has become the greatest competition for attention humanity has ever experienced. Every notification asks for a few seconds. Every headline promises urgency. Every trending story insists that it deserves your focus. Every advertisement whispers that happiness is only one purchase away. None of these interruptions seem particularly dangerous on their own. A few minutes here, 10 minutes there. An hour disappears almost unnoticed. Days become weeks. Weeks become years. Eventually, people wonder why their dreams remain exactly where they left them. The answer is rarely hidden inside a lack of ability. More often, it is hidden inside thousands of moments surrendered to distraction. Daniel believed he simply needed more time. Every evening he arrived home exhausted. He prepared dinner, relaxed for a while, opened his phone, just for a few minutes. Those few minutes became videos. The videos became recommendations. Recommendations became endless scrolling. Before long, midnight arrived. Tomorrow's ambitions quietly became tomorrow's excuses. The pattern repeated itself almost every day. Daniel never intended to waste his evenings. He simply underestimated how powerful small distractions become when repeated often enough. One Saturday morning, he visited his grandfather, Samuel, who had spent his life restoring antique clocks. The workshop felt strangely peaceful. Hundreds of clocks ticked together in quiet harmony. Daniel looked around and asked, "How do you stay focused all day?" Samuel smiled without looking up. I don't. Daniel frowned. You don't. No. I lose my attention constantly. Daniel looked surprised. Then how do you finish so much work? Samuel gently placed a tiny brass gear onto the table. I return. He pointed toward the clock in front of him. Every time my mind wanders, I simply bring it back. He paused. People think successful lives are built by never losing focus. They're actually built by returning to it. That sentence stayed with Daniel for weeks. He began paying attention to his own attention. For the first time, he noticed how often he reached for his phone without thinking. How frequently he interrupted meaningful work to satisfy momentary curiosity. How easily one notification became 30 minutes. He wasn't making conscious decisions. He was following invisible habits. That realization changed everything. You cannot improve what you refuse to observe. Many people believe wealth begins with money. It doesn't. Wealth begins with attention, because attention determines learning. Learning shapes decisions. Decisions create habits. Habits shape identity. Identity eventually influences every financial outcome. Long before someone owns valuable assets, they own something even more important: their attention. And wherever attention consistently goes, life eventually follows. Daniel decided to perform a simple experiment. Instead of asking, "How much money did I earn today?" he asked, "Where did my attention go today?" The answers surprised him. Some evenings produced nothing but entertainment. Other evenings produced knowledge, ideas, plans, skills, conversations. One kind of attention disappeared without leaving anything behind. The other quietly built his future. Money compounds, but attention compounds first. This explains why highly successful people often seem unusually protective of their time. They are not guarding minutes. They are guarding direction. A single uninterrupted hour spent learning a valuable skill may produce opportunities that echo for decades. A single distracted hour rarely leaves any lasting trace at all. Time is equal for everyone. Attention is not. Nature quietly demonstrates this truth every day. A river never reaches the ocean by flowing everywhere. It arrives because it keeps moving in one direction. Sunlight scattered across a field feels warm. The same sunlight focused through a magnifying glass can ignite fire. Power has never belonged to quantity alone. It belongs to concentration. Human potential works the same way. Scattered effort creates scattered results. Focused attention quietly transforms ordinary people into extraordinary builders. Months passed. Daniel did not become wealthy overnight. Nothing dramatic happened. Instead, something much more valuable began changing. His evenings slowly transformed. Books replaced endless scrolling. Learning replaced passive consumption. Planning replaced reacting. Creating replaced merely watching. Little by little, opportunities appeared that had always existed. He simply hadn't noticed them before. His attention had finally become available to see them. One autumn afternoon, Daniel returned to Samuel's workshop. The old clockmaker handed him a small brass compass. "I thought you repaired clocks," Daniel said with a smile. Samuel nodded. "I do. So why a compass?" The old man turned the instrument gently in his hands. "A clock tells you what time it is. A compass tells you where you're going." He looked directly into Daniel's eyes. Most people spend their lives checking the clock. Very few ever stop to check the compass. Daniel slipped the compass into his pocket. Years later, it remained one of his most valuable possessions. Not because it showed direction, but because it reminded him that every day, every hour, and every moment of attention quietly determines where a life is ultimately headed. And before wealth can ever grow inside a bank account, it must first grow inside a focused mind. That realization prepares us for the next invisible habit. Because attention alone is never enough. Once we learn to direct it, we must also learn how to protect the very engine that powers it every single day. Our energy. Chapter 2. The Energy That Builds Everything. There is an ancient story about two blacksmiths who lived on opposite sides of the same valley. Every morning before sunrise, both opened their workshops. Both possessed identical tools. Both had equal skill. Both dreamed of becoming the finest craftsmen in the kingdom. Yet after many years, only one became renowned throughout the land. Travelers waited months for his work. Kings commissioned his swords. His creations became family heirlooms passed from one generation to the next. The other blacksmith slowly disappeared into obscurity. His tools grew worn. His customers became fewer. His work lost the precision it once had. A young apprentice eventually asked the master why two equally talented men had reached such different destinations. The old blacksmith smiled and placed a glowing piece of steel upon the anvil. Then he extinguished the fire beneath it. Within moments, the bright metal became cold and rigid. "The hammer never changed," he said. "The craftsman never changed. The difference was the fire." People often speak about wealth as though it is built with money. In reality, money is usually the final result of something much deeper. Energy. Not the restless excitement that disappears after watching a motivational video. Not temporary enthusiasm. Real energy. The kind that allows someone to think clearly, to solve problems patiently, to learn continuously, to create consistently. Every meaningful achievement demands it. Without energy, even brilliant ideas remain unfinished. Without energy, opportunities quietly pass unnoticed. Without energy, discipline becomes exhausting instead of natural. The body may seem separate from financial success. Life rarely treats them as separate. Sophia believed her greatest limitation was time. Every day felt rushed. She woke already feeling tired. Coffee replaced breakfast. Lunch happened whenever she remembered. Late evenings disappeared beneath glowing screens. Sleep became something she borrowed instead of protected. She constantly promised herself that once life became less busy, she would finally begin taking care of her health. Months became years. Life never became less busy. Instead, she simply became more exhausted. One afternoon, while attending a leadership seminar, the speaker asked an unusual question. If someone offered you $1 million today, every hand immediately rose. He smiled. What if receiving that money meant you would never wake up tomorrow? The room fell silent. No one raised a hand. The speaker nodded. Interesting. So your next sunrise is worth more than $1 million. He paused. Why, then, do so many people treat their health as though it has no value at all? The sentence lingered in Sophia's mind long after the seminar ended. For the first time, she realized she had been treating her body like a machine designed to produce results instead of the source from which every result emerged. Several weeks later, Sophia met an elderly gardener named Elias. His botanical garden had become famous for producing extraordinary flowers despite the region's difficult climate. Visitors often asked him which fertilizer he used, which seeds he planted, which techniques made the greatest difference. He always smiled before giving the same answer. I care for the soil. Most visitors looked disappointed. They expected complicated secrets. Instead, Elias gently knelt beside a young rosebush. If the soil is healthy, he explained, almost everything else becomes easier. He picked up a handful of dark earth. People admire flowers. They rarely appreciate the ground that quietly nourishes them. Sophia suddenly understood. Health is the soil beneath every ambition. People obsess over careers, businesses, investments, income. Yet all of them grow from the invisible foundation of physical and mental energy. A neglected foundation eventually limits everything built upon it. No matter how impressive the structure appears, modern life often encourages exactly the opposite. Sleep becomes optional. Meals become convenient rather than nourishing. Movement becomes something postponed until there is more time. Stress quietly becomes normal. We celebrate being busy. We rarely celebrate being well. Yet the most productive people seldom achieve remarkable results because they sacrifice their health. More often, they achieve remarkable results because they protect it. Energy multiplies everything it touches. Sophia decided not to overhaul her entire life overnight. She remembered another lesson. Extraordinary lives rarely change through dramatic revolutions. They change through consistent adjustments. She began sleeping 30 minutes earlier, walking each morning before checking her phone, preparing healthier meals instead of relying on convenience, drinking more water, taking moments of genuine rest instead of constant stimulation. None of these choices felt life-changing. Individually, they seemed almost too small to matter. Together, they quietly transformed her days. Her concentration improved. Her patience expanded. Learning became easier. Problems that once felt overwhelming became manageable. She hadn't gained more hours. She had gained better energy within the hours she already possessed. Nature never rushes growth. A mighty oak does not apologize for spending years strengthening its roots before reaching toward the sky. The roots remain invisible, yet they determine everything above the ground. Health works the same way. The strongest careers, the clearest decisions, the most resilient businesses, the greatest financial achievements, all depend upon roots few people ever see. Months later, Sophia visited Elias once again. The garden looked more beautiful than ever. She asked him whether he ever worried about individual flowers. He gently shook his head. "I've learned something." "What?" "If I spend all my attention chasing flowers, I neglect the soil. But if I nourish the soil, the flowers almost always take care of themselves." Sophia smiled. The lesson reached far beyond gardening. Many people chase wealth directly. Few spend enough time cultivating the conditions from which wealth naturally grows. Clear thinking, strong health, consistent energy, emotional stability, continuous learning. These are the fertile soil of every prosperous life. Years later, when younger entrepreneurs asked Sophia for the secret behind her success, they expected investment strategies or business techniques. Instead, she often surprised them with a much simpler answer. Protect your energy before you try to multiply your income. Money follows value, and value follows the quality of the person creating it. She had discovered that financial freedom is rarely built by working until exhaustion. It is built by becoming someone capable of creating extraordinary value over an extraordinarily long period of time. Because true wealth is not a sprint fueled by urgency. It is a lifelong journey sustained by energy. And energy, like every valuable investment, must be protected before it can ever begin to compound. That understanding leads naturally to another invisible habit. For once we have learned to direct our attention and protect our energy, we face an even quieter challenge: the constant temptation to consume instead of create. Chapter 3. The Consumption Trap. There is an old legend about two sculptors who were invited to create statues for the entrance of a great city. Both received the same block of marble. Both possessed remarkable skill. Both had an entire year to complete their work. The first sculptor spent months searching for rare paints, expensive tools, and elaborate decorations. He believed greatness came from adding more ornaments, more color, more complexity. The second sculptor worked differently. Each morning he stood quietly before the marble, studying it in silence. Then he picked up his chisel. Instead of asking, "What can I add?" he asked, "What doesn't belong?" Day after day, he removed only what was unnecessary. When the year ended, the city gathered to unveil both sculptures. The first was impressive from a distance. The second became timeless. Its beauty came not from what had been added, but from what had been removed. Modern life quietly teaches us the opposite lesson. Every day we are surrounded by messages insisting that happiness is waiting just beyond the next purchase. A larger home, a newer phone, another subscription, another delivery, another upgrade, another possession promising to transform ordinary life into something extraordinary. For a brief moment, each purchase delivers excitement. Then the feeling fades. The search quietly begins again. Consumption has become one of the world's most persuasive stories. Yet it asks a dangerous question. What else do you need? Wealth asks a different one. What already matters? Oliver rarely thought of himself as impulsive. He considered himself responsible. He paid his bills, worked hard, saved occasionally. Yet at the end of every month, very little remained. Nothing dramatic explained where the money had gone. There had been no luxury vacations, no extravagant purchases, only dozens of small decisions. A premium coffee, another streaming service, clothes bought because they were on sale, a gadget that seemed useful for a week, meals ordered because cooking felt inconvenient. Each expense appeared harmless. Together, they quietly shaped his financial future. One rainy afternoon, Oliver visited an old bookstore while waiting for the weather to clear. In the back of the shop sat an elderly woman repairing antique books by hand. She worked slowly, almost meditatively. Curious, Oliver asked why she spent so much time restoring books instead of replacing them with new ones. She smiled. Because value and novelty are not the same. Seeing his puzzled expression, she lifted a beautifully restored leather-bound journal. This book has survived 3 generations. It carries memories. It carries wisdom. It carries care. She gently closed the cover. Many people mistake owning more things for possessing more value. They're rarely the same. The sentence lingered in Oliver's mind. He began paying attention not to what people bought, but why they bought it. Some purchases solved real problems. Others filled emotional spaces. Loneliness, stress, boredom, comparison. The purchase itself was rarely the true motivation. Consumption often became a substitute for something much deeper. There is nothing wrong with enjoying beautiful things. The problem begins when possessions quietly become emotional medicine. When shopping replaces reflection. When buying replaces building. When spending replaces creating. Many people attempt to purchase the feeling that meaningful work naturally provides. The satisfaction lasts only until the next advertisement appears. Several weeks later, Oliver returned to the bookstore. The elderly woman invited him to help organize a shelf filled with books donated over many decades. As they worked, she asked, "Tell me something. If your house disappeared tomorrow, what would remain?" Oliver laughed nervously. "I've never thought about that." She nodded. "Most people haven't." She placed another book onto the shelf. "Your skills would remain. Your character. Your knowledge. Your relationships. The habits you've practiced." She smiled gently. "Those are the possessions that cannot be misplaced." That evening, Oliver looked around his apartment with different eyes. Many objects had once seemed essential. Now they felt strangely temporary. He realized he had been measuring progress by accumulation rather than transformation. The difference was profound. Accumulation asks, "How much can I own?" Transformation asks, "Who am I becoming?" One question fills closets. The other builds lives. Nature quietly offers the same lesson. A river carries only what serves its journey. A tree grows by drawing nourishment from the earth, not by collecting every leaf that falls around it. The sky remains beautiful precisely because it holds only what belongs there. Excess often hides simplicity. Simplicity reveals what truly matters. Oliver made a quiet experiment. Before every purchase, he asked himself one question. Will this improve my life after the excitement disappears? Many purchases never happened. Others became more intentional. Instead of replacing perfectly useful things, he invested in learning. Instead of chasing trends, he improved his skills. Instead of buying temporary excitement, he built lasting capability. Gradually, something unexpected happened. His bank account grew, but more importantly, so did his confidence. He no longer depended upon buying something new to feel successful. He had discovered a quieter form of abundance. Months later, Oliver met the bookseller one final time. She handed him a blank leather journal. "No charge," she said. He protested. She shook her head. "It's an investment." "In what?" "In the ideas you'll write." She looked toward the rows of restored books surrounding them. "The wealthiest people I have ever known collected fewer possessions than most. But they collected extraordinary thoughts. They invested in wisdom long before they invested in luxury." Oliver opened the journal. The first page contained only one handwritten sentence. "The richest life is built by creating more value than you consume." He carried that journal for many years. His pages gradually filled with business ideas, financial plans, lessons, reflections, dreams. Ironically, the most valuable thing he received that year had cost nothing. The world constantly encourages us to consume. Very few voices encourage us to create. Yet nearly every lasting fortune has begun the same way. Someone solved a problem, improved a process, shared knowledge, built something useful, created value that continued serving others long after the work was finished. Consumption may offer comfort for a moment. Creation offers freedom for a lifetime. And once a person discovers the quiet satisfaction of building rather than merely buying, an entirely different relationship with money begins to emerge. Because wealth is no longer measured by what enters your home. It is measured by what leaves your hands and improves the lives of others. That realization prepares us for the next invisible habit. For after learning to protect our attention, our energy, and our resources, we must confront an even greater challenge: the difference between spending for today and building for tomorrow. Chapter 4. Building tomorrow before it arrives. There is an old tale about two brothers who inherited identical pieces of farmland. The soil was rich. A river flowed nearby. The seasons were generous. Every advantage seemed equal. During the first harvest, both gathered more grain than they needed. The younger brother celebrated. He sold nearly everything, bought finer clothes, hosted lavish feasts, and filled his home with beautiful furniture. "The future will take care of itself," he often said. The older brother celebrated as well. But after every harvest, he quietly carried a portion of his grain into a stone building at the edge of the field. His neighbors often asked why he refused to enjoy everything he had earned. He simply smiled. "I'm not storing grain. I'm storing choices." Years later, a terrible drought arrived. The fields that once shimmered with golden crops turned brown beneath an unforgiving sun. The younger brother stood helplessly outside an empty barn. The older brother calmly unlocked the heavy wooden doors of his stone storehouse. Inside waited years of quiet preparation. One brother had consumed abundance. The other had preserved possibility. Most people imagine wealth as having more money. But money by itself changes very little. Its true power lies elsewhere. Money represents options. The freedom to solve problems without panic. The ability to recognize opportunity without fear. The confidence to make decisions based on long-term vision instead of immediate survival. Financial security is rarely about luxury. It is about breathing without constant anxiety. Emma believed every dollar she earned had a destination. Rent, food, utilities, entertainment, small rewards for working hard. By the end of each month, her account looked almost exactly as it had before payday. Whenever unexpected expenses appeared, stress immediately followed. A broken appliance, a medical bill, car repair. Life seemed determined to surprise her at the worst possible moments. One evening, frustrated after another unexpected expense, she visited her grandfather, Arthur. He had spent 40 years building bridges across the country. Looking around his workshop, Emma noticed dozens of blueprints carefully rolled and labeled. Curious, she asked, "Why keep plans for bridges you've already built?" Arthur unrolled one faded drawing. "Because every bridge begins long before the first stone is laid." He traced a finger across the paper. "Most people admire the finished bridge. They never see the years of planning that made crossing possible." Emma thought about that conversation for days. Perhaps financial freedom worked the same way. Perhaps wealth wasn't built when opportunity appeared. Perhaps it was built long before opportunity ever arrived. There is an invisible difference between reacting and preparing. Reactive people solve today's problems. Prepared people quietly reduce tomorrow's problems before they exist. The distinction seems small. Its consequences are enormous. Imagine two people receiving the same unexpected opportunity. A chance to invest in a promising business. An opportunity to purchase a valuable property. A chance to take time away from work to learn a new skill. One smiles. The other sighs. Not because one is luckier. Because one prepared. Savings do more than protect against emergencies. They create the freedom to say yes when life offers something extraordinary. Nature understands preparation better than people often do. Long before winter arrives, squirrels gather food. Trees strengthen their roots before storms appear. Seeds spend months beneath the soil before reaching sunlight. Nothing in nature waits until the last moment to prepare. Only humans repeatedly convince themselves that tomorrow will somehow solve itself. Emma decided to begin with something surprisingly small. Instead of saving whatever remained at the end of each month, she saved first. The amount hardly seemed impressive. Some weeks it felt almost insignificant. She occasionally wondered whether such small contributions could ever matter. Then Arthur handed her a tiny acorn. "What do you see?" "A seed." He nodded. "What else?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know." Arthur smiled. "I see a forest." The lesson wasn't about money. It was about perspective. Small beginnings often carry invisible futures. $1 becomes another. One habit becomes a lifestyle. One wise decision quietly transforms the next. Compounding rarely announces itself. It whispers, month after month, year after year, until one day people call the result extraordinary. As time passed, Emma noticed something unexpected. Her savings changed more than her finances. They changed her emotions. She no longer feared every unexpected phone call. She no longer viewed uncertainty as disaster. Confidence quietly replaced anxiety. Because preparation doesn't simply create financial stability. It creates emotional stability. And emotional stability often leads to better financial decisions. Fear rushes. Confidence considers. Several years later, Arthur invited Emma to visit one of the bridges he had built decades earlier. Cars moved steadily across its massive steel arches. Children laughed as they walked along the pedestrian path. Thousands of people crossed it every day without giving it a second thought. Arthur rested his hand against the weathered railing. "No one thanks the foundation." Emma looked down toward the enormous concrete pillars disappearing into the river below. "They can't even see it." Arthur smiled. "Exactly. The most important parts of almost everything remain invisible. The same is true of wealth. People admire successful businesses. They rarely admire the emergency fund that allowed an entrepreneur to survive difficult years. They admire confident investors. They rarely notice the disciplined saving that gave them the courage to act. They admire financial freedom. They seldom see the thousands of quiet decisions that built it. Before they left, Arthur handed Emma one final blueprint. Unlike the others, this page was completely blank. Across the top, he had written only one sentence. "The future is built long before it arrives." Emma folded the page carefully and placed it inside her notebook. It reminded her that wealth is never merely about accumulating money. It is about creating possibilities. It is about building invisible foundations that allow visible dreams to stand. Because when opportunity finally knocks, it rarely waits for someone to become ready. It belongs to those who prepared while everyone else was waiting. And that quiet discipline leads us to another truth. Saving money is only the beginning. The next step is learning the profound difference between owning things that consume your future and owning things that quietly build it. Chapter 5. The Ownership Mind. There is an old story about two builders who were hired to construct homes on neighboring hills. Both were given the same amount of stone, the same timber, the same amount of time. When the work was finished, the houses looked almost identical. Visitors admired both equally, but an old architect who had watched them every day quietly smiled. He knew something no one else did. The first builder had borrowed nearly every tool he used. The second had spent years slowly collecting his own. At first, borrowing seemed wiser. It was faster, cheaper, more convenient. But every season brought another fee, another delay, another dependency. Whenever repairs were needed, the first builder waited for permission. The second simply opened his workshop and got to work. Years later, the houses still looked similar. The lives behind them no longer did. One man had built a house. The other had built independence. Most people believe ownership is about possessing expensive things. A luxury car, a large home, a collection of impressive possessions. But ownership has very little to do with appearance. Ownership is about control. It is about holding something that continues creating value long after the excitement of acquiring it has disappeared. Consumption asks, "What can this give me today?" Ownership asks, "What can this continue giving me tomorrow?" The questions sound similar. Their answers shape entirely different futures. Nathan had always admired successful people. He noticed their confidence, their freedom, their ability to make choices without constant financial pressure. He assumed they simply earned more money. Then one afternoon, while helping his uncle renovate an old warehouse, he noticed something unusual. The building contained almost nothing luxurious. The furniture was simple, the office modest. Even the owner's car looked surprisingly ordinary. Confused, Nathan asked, "I thought successful people bought expensive things." His uncle laughed softly. "Some do, but the wealthiest people I've known usually buy something else first." "What?" "Things that pay them back." The words sounded simple, yet Nathan couldn't stop thinking about them. Things that pay you back. Most of the objects he owned did exactly the opposite. His phone required monthly payments. His car lost value every year. Subscriptions quietly emptied his account each month. New clothes eventually became old clothes. Very few possessions improved his financial future. Most simply became older. Several weeks later, Nathan met an elderly violin maker named Luca. For over 50 years, Luca had handcrafted instruments that musicians treasured around the world. His workshop contained tools so old they looked almost ancient. Nathan asked why he never replaced them with newer equipment. Luca gently picked up a beautifully worn chisel. "This tool has earned me more than I ever paid for it." He smiled. "It stopped being an expense decades ago. It became a partner." Nathan suddenly realized something. There is a profound difference between buying something and acquiring an asset. An expense asks for your attention. An asset rewards it. An expense waits to be replaced. An asset quietly continues serving. An expense removes options. An asset creates them. Ownership is not measured by price. It is measured by purpose. Nature quietly reflects this principle. A fruit tree spends years growing before producing its first harvest. Once mature, however, it continues giving season after season. The farmer who constantly consumes every seed eventually runs out. The farmer who plants some of today's harvest creates tomorrow's abundance. Every forest begins with someone choosing not to eat every seed. Nathan began examining his financial decisions differently. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" he asked, "Will this continue creating value after today?" Sometimes the answer was obvious. A course that improved his skills, books that expanded his understanding, equipment that increased the quality of his work, investments that represented ownership in productive businesses. Other purchases quietly lost their appeal. They offered excitement, but no lasting return. Months passed. Nathan wasn't becoming richer because he spent less. He was becoming richer because he owned more of what mattered. His knowledge grew. His investments slowly expanded. His skills attracted better opportunities. Little by little, his income began working alongside him instead of depending entirely upon him. That was the moment he understood a truth rarely discussed. Working hard creates income. Ownership creates freedom. One autumn evening, Luca invited Nathan into a small room hidden behind the workshop. Inside stood shelves filled with violins made over many decades. Some had never been sold. Nathan looked puzzled. "Why keep these?" Luca carefully lifted one from its case. "Because some things become more valuable with time." He ran his fingers across the polished wood. "I built this 40 years ago. It's worth far more today than when I finished it." Nathan admired the instrument. "It doesn't seem fair." Luca smiled. "It isn't luck. It's patience." The lesson extended far beyond violins. Many people spend their lives chasing things that become worth less every year. Others quietly dedicate themselves to building and owning things that become worth more. Skills, businesses, investments, reputation, trust, knowledge. These are forms of ownership no market crash can completely erase. They continue paying dividends long after the original effort has been forgotten. Before Nathan left, Luca handed him a tiny wooden seed carved from oak. Across its surface were engraved four simple words: "Own what creates tomorrow." Nathan carried it in his pocket for years. Whenever he faced a financial decision, he would gently turn the small carving between his fingers. It reminded him that wealth is rarely built by collecting more possessions. It is built by gradually increasing ownership of things that continue creating value without demanding constant replacement. Because financial freedom begins the moment your money stops working only for today and starts quietly working for every tomorrow that follows. And once we understand the power of ownership, another important question naturally emerges. How do some people remain trapped by circumstances, while others transform setbacks into opportunities for growth? The answer lies not in their resources, but in the stories they tell themselves about responsibility. Chapter 6. The Mirror of Responsibility. There is an old story about two stonemasons who worked side by side at the base of a magnificent mountain. Each morning they carried the same heavy blocks of granite. Each endured the same weather. Each earned the same modest wage. Yet they spoke about their lives very differently. Whenever the first mason stumbled, he blamed the mountain. If rain slowed his progress, he blamed the sky. If a stone cracked, he blamed the quarry. If another worker advanced more quickly, he blamed luck. The second mason rarely complained. When a stone broke, he studied why. When the weather changed, he adjusted his methods. When another craftsman surpassed him, he asked questions instead of making excuses. Years passed. One remained exactly where he had begun. The other became the architect responsible for designing the very buildings he once helped construct. The mountain had never changed. Only the man climbing it had. Life presents everyone with circumstances beyond their control. Where we are born, the family that raises us, unexpected illness, economic downturns, natural disasters, loss. No amount of determination can erase every hardship. To pretend otherwise would ignore the realities many people face. Yet within those realities lies a quieter truth. While we cannot choose every event that enters our lives, we almost always retain the ability to choose our response. That choice, repeated over years, quietly shapes our future. Responsibility is often misunderstood. Many people hear the word and imagine blame. But responsibility is not about assigning fault. It is about reclaiming influence. Blame asks, "Whose fault is this?" Responsibility asks, "What can I do next?" The first question often leaves us powerless. The second opens the door to action. Michael believed life had treated him unfairly. His business had failed. Friends had moved ahead while he remained stuck. Every setback seemed to confirm what he already suspected, that success belonged to people with better opportunities. Whenever someone shared advice, Michael could immediately explain why it wouldn't work for him. His reasons were detailed, convincing, sometimes even true. Yet despite being right about many of his difficulties, his life remained unchanged. One afternoon he accepted an invitation from an old professor named Elias, who taught leadership long after retiring from the university. Instead of meeting in an office, Elias took Michael to a quiet lake surrounded by pine trees. Without saying a word, the professor handed him a small wooden boat. There were no oars, only a sail. Michael laughed. "How am I supposed to move this?" "You aren't," Elias replied. "The wind will." Michael waited. The boat drifted aimlessly across the water. Sometimes forward, sometimes backward, sometimes in circles. After several minutes, Elias handed him a small rudder. Michael guided the boat toward the opposite shore. The wind had not changed, only his ability to respond to it. Elias watched the boat reach land before speaking. Most people spend their lives trying to control the wind. He looked across the lake. The wiser ones learn to master the rudder. Michael remained silent. The lesson felt uncomfortably personal. Over the following weeks, Michael began noticing something surprising. Every complaint carried an invisible message. Someone else controls my future. Every excuse quietly surrendered another piece of his power. Traffic, the economy, his employer, his childhood, his competitors, his circumstances. Some of these influences were real, but constantly focusing on them prevented him from seeing the choices that still belonged to him. Responsibility did not erase difficulty. It revealed possibility. Nature quietly demonstrates this principle again and again. A tree cannot choose where its seed lands. Some grow in fertile valleys. Others emerge from cracks in solid rock. The conditions are not equal, yet every tree reaches toward the same sunlight. It grows with whatever resources are available. It does not waste energy wishing it had been planted somewhere else. Its strength comes from responding to reality rather than resisting it. Michael began making one simple change. Whenever something went wrong, he refused to ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, he asked, "What is this trying to teach me?" Sometimes the lesson was painful. Sometimes it exposed mistakes he would rather ignore. But every answer gave him something valuable. A direction, a skill to improve, a conversation to have, a habit to change. Progress returned slowly, then steadily. Months later, Michael visited Elias once more. The professor led him into a room filled with mirrors of every shape and size. Some were polished silver. Others were old and weathered. One large mirror stood alone in the center. "What do you see?" Elias asked. "My reflection." "Exactly." He smiled. "Mirrors never argue. They simply reveal." He paused. Responsibility works the same way. It isn't interested in making you feel guilty. It simply shows you where change begins. Michael looked at his reflection for a long moment. He finally understood that responsibility was not a burden placed upon successful people. It was the very reason they became successful. By accepting ownership of their choices, they gained the ability to improve them. By refusing to surrender their future to circumstances, they gradually reclaimed control over it. That realization transformed not only his business, but every relationship in his life. His health improved because he accepted responsibility for his habits. His finances improved because he accepted responsibility for his spending. His career improved because he accepted responsibility for his learning. Nothing changed overnight. Everything changed eventually. Years later, when young entrepreneurs asked Michael how to overcome bad luck, he rarely spoke about markets or strategy. Instead, he would draw a small circle on a sheet of paper. Inside the circle, he wrote only 2 words: "My choice." Then he drew a much larger circle around it. Inside the larger circle, he wrote, "Everything else." He slid the paper across the table. You'll spend your entire life deciding which circle deserves your attention. The smaller one is where your power lives. The larger one is where your excuses live. The choice between them quietly determines the direction of your future. Financial freedom is not built by pretending life is fair. It is built by responding wisely when life is unfair. The most resilient people are not those who avoid hardship. They are those who refuse to let hardship become their identity. Because every setback contains 2 invisible paths. One leads toward resentment, the other leads toward growth. Only one of them compounds. And once we accept responsibility for the direction of our lives, another quiet truth begins to emerge. Our future is influenced not only by our own choices, but also by the people whose voices surround us every day. Chapter 7. The Company You Keep. There is an old legend about a young eagle that was raised among sparrows. When the egg was discovered after a storm, the sparrows welcomed it without hesitation. The eaglet learned everything by watching them. It hopped from branch to branch. It searched for crumbs on the ground. It celebrated short flights between nearby trees. Whenever it looked toward the mountains where great eagles circled above the clouds, the sparrows would laugh. Those birds are different. They were born for the sky. We belong down here. The young eagle believed them. After all, they were the only family it had ever known. Years passed. Its wings grew larger than everyone else's. Its strength became impossible to ignore. Yet it never attempted to soar. Not because it lacked the ability, because it lacked permission. One autumn afternoon, an old eagle descended from the mountains and landed beside the flock. He studied the young bird in silence. Then he asked a simple question. "Who told you that you belong here?" The young eagle looked around nervously. "This is where everyone I know lives." The old eagle smiled gently. "That answers my question. Human beings are shaped by something remarkably powerful. Not just what they believe, but what the people around them believe. Our ambitions, our expectations, even our definition of what is possible often comes from the conversations we hear every day. Spend enough time around people who see opportunity, and your mind begins searching for it. Spend enough time around people who only see obstacles, and eventually your eyes do the same. Influence is quiet. It rarely announces itself. It simply becomes normal. Ethan had known the same group of friends since childhood. Every Friday evening they gathered at the same cafe. The conversations rarely changed. They complained about rising prices, criticized successful people, laughed at anyone who started a business, discussed dreams they never intended to pursue. Whenever someone mentioned learning a new skill or investing for the future, someone else would quickly respond, "That only works for lucky people." The table would nod in agreement. The conversation would move on. Week after week, year after year, nothing changed. One evening Ethan couldn't attend because of work. Instead, he accepted an invitation from a former colleague named Maya to join a small dinner with entrepreneurs, engineers, artists, and teachers. The atmosphere felt strangely different. Nobody boasted. Nobody pretended life was easy. But every conversation revolved around solutions. One person described a business that had failed. Instead of ridicule, the table became curious. "What did you learn?" Another spoke about taking an online course after work. Someone else shared a book that had completely changed the way they approached investing. No one claimed to know everything. Everyone seemed eager to learn something. Ethan drove home unusually quiet. For the first time, he realized that conversations themselves can shape a person's future. A week later, Ethan visited his grandmother, Clara, who had spent decades tending an orchard. As they walked between rows of fruit trees, she pointed toward two vines growing side by side. One had wrapped itself around a sturdy oak. The other climbed an old fence that had begun to collapse. "Do you notice anything?" she asked. Ethan looked carefully. "The one climbing the oak looks healthier." Clara nodded. "Neither vine chooses its own strength, but each borrows something from what it grows beside." She rested her hand on the oak's rough bark. People are much the same. The lesson stayed with Ethan. He began observing not just the words people spoke, but the direction those words created. Some conversations left him feeling inspired. Others left him feeling smaller. Some people celebrated growth. Others quietly feared it. Whenever someone succeeded, one group asked, "How did they do it?" The other asked, "Why do they deserve it?" The questions revealed entirely different mindsets. There is an important truth worth remembering. Surrounding yourself with ambitious people does not guarantee success. But surrounding yourself with people who constantly discourage growth almost guarantees stagnation. Our environment cannot make our choices for us, can, however, make certain choices feel natural. That is why gardeners pay careful attention to the soil, why architects examine the foundation, why pilots constantly check their surroundings. Environment quietly shapes outcomes long before results become visible. Ethan didn't abandon his old friends. He simply stopped allowing every opinion to become his own. He became more intentional about whose advice he accepted. He spent more time with people who challenged him. He listened to those who had built what he hoped to build. He read biographies, joined professional communities, attended workshops. Even books became companions. He discovered that mentors need not always sit across a table. Sometimes they speak through pages written decades earlier. Sometimes they teach through examples rather than conversations. Gradually, his inner dialogue began to change. Instead of asking, "Can someone like me really do this?" he found himself asking, "What can I learn from someone who already has?" That single shift quietly expanded his world. Months later, Ethan returned to Clara's orchard. She handed him two small seeds. "They're identical," she said. He examined them closely. "They look exactly the same." "They are." She walked to opposite ends of the orchard. One patch of ground was rich and well cared for. The other was dry and neglected. She planted one seed in each. "Which one will become the stronger tree?" she asked. "The one in healthy soil." She smiled. The seed didn't change. The environment did. As the seasons passed, the difference became impossible to ignore. The tree growing in fertile soil reached higher. Its branches spread wider. Its roots grew deeper. The other struggled simply to survive. Both possessed the same potential. Only one received the conditions needed to express it. People often work the same way. Talent matters. Discipline matters. Character matters. But environment quietly amplifies or diminishes all three. Years later, when Ethan mentored young entrepreneurs, he rarely began by discussing business plans. Instead, he asked a different question. "Tell me about the people you spend the most time with." Some looked surprised. "What does that have to do with building wealth?" Ethan smiled. "Almost everything." He drew 5 circles on a blank page. Inside the center circle, he wrote the person's name. Inside the remaining 4 circles, he wrote conversations, influences, expectations, standards. Then he slid the paper across the table. Your future is often built long before you make your next financial decision. It begins with the voices you hear so often that you eventually mistake them for your own. The old eagle had been right. The greatest limitation was never the young bird's wings. It was the invisible belief that flying belonged to someone else. Financial freedom follows a similar path. It begins the moment we surround ourselves with ideas, people, and environments that encourage growth rather than justify limitation. Because the people around us do more than share our journey. They quietly influence the direction of our compass. And once we begin choosing our environment with intention, another question naturally follows. What happens when opportunity finally arrives, but fear convinces us never to begin? That is where our next lesson begins. Chapter 8. The Courage to Begin. There is an old story about a master shipbuilder whose vessels were known throughout the kingdom. Every ship he built crossed oceans that others believed impossible to navigate. Kings sought his advice. Merchants waited years for his work. One day, a young apprentice asked him the question everyone else was afraid to ask. What is the secret to building such extraordinary ships? The old builder smiled and led the apprentice to a quiet harbor. Along the shoreline stood dozens of magnificent ships. Some had returned from distant voyages, their sails weathered by countless storms. Others looked brand new. Their wood gleamed beneath the morning sun. Not a single scratch marked their polished hulls. The apprentice admired the untouched vessels. "They're beautiful." "They are," the old man replied. "But they have never left the harbor." He paused before adding quietly, "A ship is safest in the harbor." But that was never the reason ships were built. There comes a moment in every person's life when preparation is no longer enough. The books have been read. The plans have been written. The skills have been practiced. The dream has become clear. Only one thing remains: beginning. And strangely, that final step often becomes the hardest. Not because it requires the greatest effort, because it requires the greatest courage. For years, Maya carried a leather notebook wherever she went. Its pages overflowed with ideas, business concepts, product sketches, marketing strategies, financial goals. Every few weeks she added another brilliant plan. Each seemed better than the last. Friends often praised her creativity. "You always have incredible ideas." She smiled politely, but deep inside, she knew something uncomfortable. Ideas had become her hiding place. Planning felt productive. Thinking felt safe. Starting felt terrifying. One afternoon, Maya attended a lecture by an elderly architect named Victor. Instead of speaking about buildings, Victor began by placing 2 bricks on a table. They looked completely ordinary. He asked the audience, "Which brick is more valuable?" People studied them carefully. "They're identical." Victor nodded. "Exactly." He picked up the first brick. This brick spent 20 years waiting for the perfect cathedral. He placed it back on the table. Then he lifted the second. This one became part of a small village school. The room remained silent. The first brick dreamed. The second brick served. Those words followed Maya home. She realized something profound. Perfection is often fear wearing elegant clothes. Convinces us that waiting is wisdom. That another course, another book, another year, another certification, another plan will finally make us ready. But readiness is a horizon. The closer we move toward it, the farther it seems to drift away. Nature has never waited for perfect conditions. Seeds do not ask whether every future storm has already passed. Rivers do not delay their journey until every stone has been removed. Birds do not postpone flight until the wind becomes predictable. Growth always begins before certainty arrives. Perhaps that is why it remains so difficult. Maya made herself a promise. She would launch something before she felt completely prepared. Not because incomplete work was acceptable, but because unfinished dreams help no one. The first version of her online course attracted only 12 students. She had secretly hoped for hundreds. The website contained mistakes. Her presentation felt awkward. Several lessons needed improvement. For one evening, disappointment whispered that perhaps she wasn't meant for this after all. Then she received her first email. The student wrote, "Your course helped me start the business I had postponed for years." Suddenly, perfection no longer mattered. Progress did. Months later, Maya visited Victor's workshop. Half-finished architectural models covered every table. She noticed that none looked flawless. Some walls were missing. Roofs remained incomplete. Pencil marks covered nearly every drawing. "I thought architects created perfect plans," she said. Victor laughed. "They do." Eventually, he handed her one unfinished blueprint. "This drawing has been revised 38 times. She looked surprised. 38. Victor smiled. "The world only remembers the finished cathedral. It forgets the thousands of imperfect sketches that made it possible." Failure carries a reputation it does not deserve. People fear failure because they imagine it as the opposite of success. In reality, failure is often the tuition we pay for wisdom. Every entrepreneur who built something meaningful made costly mistakes. Every accomplished investor endured poor decisions. Every skilled artist created work they would never display. The difference was never the absence of failure. It was the refusal to let failure become the final chapter. Maya gradually discovered another truth. Confidence rarely appears before action. It usually arrives because of action. Each conversation became easier than the last. Each presentation improved. Each mistake revealed another lesson. Each attempt quietly transformed who she was becoming. She hadn't been waiting for confidence. Confidence had been waiting for her. One evening, Victor invited Maya back to the harbor where they had first met. The same untouched ships still rested peacefully along the shore. Nearby, another vessel prepared to depart. Its sails billowed in the evening wind. The crew worked quickly, knowing the sea offered no guarantees. Victor pointed toward the departing ship. "That captain knows storms are coming." Maya nodded. "So why leave?" Victor smiled. "Because the destination is worth more than the comfort of staying." Before she left, Victor handed Maya a small compass. On its brass cover were engraved 6 simple words. "Dream less, begin more, improve always." She carried it with her for many years. Whenever fear suggested waiting for the perfect moment, she would open the compass and remember the silent ships. Perfect, safe, and used. She realized that dreams are not measured by how beautifully they are imagined. They are measured by how courageously they are lived. Because the greatest tragedy is not failing after trying. It is spending an entire lifetime protecting potential that never becomes reality. The world has never been transformed by perfect ideas locked inside notebooks. It has always been transformed by imperfect people willing to take the first step. And once that first step is taken, another lesson quietly reveals itself. Success is never built by one courageous beginning alone. It is sustained by something even more powerful, the quiet discipline of continuing long after the excitement of starting has faded. Chapter 9. There is an old story about 2 craftsmen who arrived in a small village on the same spring morning. Both were offered identical workshops. Both possessed remarkable talent. Both dreamed of becoming masters of their trade. The first craftsman asked only one question. "How quickly can I make money here?" The second asked something entirely different. "What can I build here that will still matter 20 years from now?" At first, the first craftsman appeared far more successful. He accepted every job, used inexpensive materials, finished projects as quickly as possible. Customers were impressed by the speed. His workshop remained busy. The second craftsman worked more slowly. He studied every piece of wood before making the first cut. He refused projects that compromised his standards. He spent evenings improving techniques that no customer would ever notice. Many people believed he lacked ambition. Years passed. The first workshop slowly emptied. Repairs became frequent. Customers stopped returning. The The second workshop became impossible to book. People traveled from distant towns, willing to wait months for work they trusted would last a lifetime. The first craftsman built transactions. The second built a reputation. Modern culture celebrates speed, fast profits, fast success, fast growth, fast results. Everything seems designed to convince us that the shortest path is always the smartest one. Yet nearly everything valuable in nature follows a different rhythm. A forest cannot be rushed. A mountain cannot be hurried. An oak tree does not become magnificent because it grows quickly. It becomes magnificent because it continues growing long after smaller plants have disappeared. Wealth often follows the same quiet law. The greatest rewards belong not to those who move the fastest, but to those who continue moving when others become impatient. After launching her first business, Maya believed success would arrive quickly. She imagined steady growth, exciting opportunities, financial freedom within a few years. Instead, reality felt much slower. Some months brought new customers. Others brought almost none. There were days when she questioned everything. Friends who had once encouraged her quietly suggested finding something more stable. Even her own confidence began to fade. One evening, discouraged after another difficult week, she visited an elderly watchmaker named Gabriel. For over 60 years, Gabriel had handcrafted mechanical watches known for lasting generations. Maya watched him carefully assemble dozens of tiny gears. Each movement appeared almost insignificant. She finally asked, "How do you stay patient when progress is so slow?" Gabriel smiled without looking up. "I don't measure my work by today's movement." He gently placed another gear inside the watch. "I measure it by whether the watch will still be keeping time when I'm gone." The sentence settled into Maya's thoughts like a seed finding fertile ground. She realized she had been measuring success by immediate results instead of lasting direction. Every slow month felt like failure. Every obstacle felt permanent. But perhaps she had been asking the wrong question. Not, "How fast am I growing?" but, "Am I still growing?" The difference changed everything. The financial world often rewards patience more generously than brilliance. Investments grow because time quietly magnifies consistency. Businesses flourish because trust accumulates gradually. Skills become valuable because years of practice compound into mastery. Relationships deepen because reliability cannot be rushed. Compounding is one of life's greatest forces. Yet it demands something many people struggle to offer: time. A bamboo forest provides one of nature's most remarkable lessons. For several years after planting, almost nothing appears above the ground. Someone passing by might assume nothing is happening. But beneath the surface, an extraordinary network of roots is quietly expanding. Only after those invisible foundations become strong enough does the bamboo suddenly rise toward the sky with astonishing speed. People often admire the rapid growth. They rarely appreciate the years of invisible preparation. Many successful lives follow exactly the same pattern. Maya stopped chasing dramatic breakthroughs. Instead, she focused on small promises. Improve one lesson, serve one customer better, read one chapter, save one little bit more, learn one new skill, reach one more person. None of these actions felt extraordinary. Together, they quietly became unstoppable. Every day added another brick to a foundation no one else could see. Months became years. The business slowly expanded. New opportunities appeared. Customers recommended her work without being asked. Income became more predictable. The changes seemed almost mysterious to outsiders. People often asked, "What was the turning point?" Maya smiled. There wasn't one. There were thousands. Thousands of mornings. Thousands of decisions. Thousands of moments when quitting would have been easier than continuing. One afternoon, Gabriel invited Maya into a room where dozens of clocks lined the walls. Some were over 100 years old. Each ticked with calm precision. He pointed toward one beautifully crafted clock. My grandfather built that. It still works. Maya stood quietly. It has outlived him. Gabriel nodded. That's what good work does. It continues serving long after the hands that created it are gone. He looked directly at her. Don't build for applause. Build for endurance. Those words reshaped the way Maya approached every decision. She no longer searched for shortcuts. She searched for durability. Instead of asking, "Will this make me successful this year?" she asked, "Will this still matter 10 years from now?" Remarkably, the second question often produced better answers for the first. Because lasting success is rarely created by chasing immediate rewards. It emerges naturally from consistently creating lasting value. Before Maya left, Gabriel handed her a tiny brass gear from an unfinished watch. "It doesn't look important," she said. "It isn't." He smiled. "Until it's missing." He closed her hand around it. "Remember this. The greatest achievements are built from countless small actions that seem insignificant while you're doing them." Years later, Maya kept that tiny gear on her desk. Whenever progress felt slow, she would hold it between her fingers and remember the old watchmaker. Masterpieces are never assembled in a single day. Neither are meaningful lives. Every quiet effort, every patient decision, every disciplined habit, every honest improvement becomes another invisible gear inside the remarkable machine we call success. Because wealth does not belong to those who race toward the finish line. It belongs to those who keep walking long after the crowd has stopped. And that brings us to the final lesson of our journey. For after learning to master attention, energy, consumption, preparation, ownership, responsibility, relationships, and perseverance, one question remains. What does true wealth actually look like once we finally arrive there? Final chapter. There is an old story about a king who wanted to discover the richest person in his kingdom. He expected to find a palace filled with gold, vaults overflowing with treasure, servants waiting behind every door. Instead, his advisors led him to a quiet craftsman who lived in a modest stone house overlooking a peaceful valley. The king looked around in confusion. "This man. He owns very little." The craftsman smiled warmly. "I own everything I need." The king frowned. "But surely you wish for more." The old man invited him into a small workshop where shelves were filled with handmade instruments, journals, sketches, and books worn smooth by decades of use. "My wealth isn't stored in these walls," he said. "It's stored in the person I've become." The king remained silent. The craftsman continued. "If someone stole my house, I could build another. If someone emptied my bank account, I still possess the skills that created it. If fortune disappeared tomorrow, my character would remain. And character always knows how to begin again." Throughout this journey, we have explored habits that quietly shape financial freedom. We discovered that attention determines direction, that energy fuels achievement, that creators eventually outgrow consumers, that preparation invites opportunity, that ownership builds independence, that responsibility restores power, that our environment influences our future, that courage transforms ideas into reality, and that patience allows every worthwhile investment to compound. Each lesson appeared different, yet they were all pointing toward the same destination. Wealth is never merely about money. Money is simply one reflection of something much deeper. Imagine for a moment that two people lose everything they own. Their savings disappear. Their businesses fail. Their possessions vanish overnight. From a distance, their situations appear identical. Yet one quietly begins rebuilding almost immediately. The other remains trapped for years. What separates them? Not luck, not intelligence, not connections. The difference lies within invisible assets: knowledge, discipline, resilience, integrity, adaptability, curiosity. These qualities cannot be confiscated. They cannot be stolen by inflation. They cannot be erased by economic downturns. They continue producing value wherever their owner goes. That is why true wealth begins long before a bank account reflects it. Years after Maya's business had become successful, she was invited to speak with a group of young entrepreneurs. They expected a presentation filled with investment strategies and financial formulas. Instead, she walked onto the stage carrying only a weathered wooden box. Inside were a brass compass, a carved oak seed, a tiny watch gear, a blank leather journal, a small wooden boat. The audience looked puzzled. She smiled. "These are the most valuable investments I ever received." She lifted the compass. "This taught me that direction matters more than speed." She held up the oak seed. "This reminded me that every great forest begins with something almost invisible." She placed the tiny gear in her palm. "This showed me that small actions become extraordinary when repeated consistently." Then she opened the journal. Its pages were filled with ideas, mistakes, lessons, dreams, plans that had become businesses, failures that had become wisdom. She gently closed it again. "No investment has ever earned me greater returns than learning." The room remained completely silent. Then someone asked, "If you could lose only one thing, what would you protect above everything else?" Maya answered without hesitation, "My ability to create value. Because once you know how to create value, money becomes a visitor, not a master." The seasons quietly teach this lesson every year. Winter never believes spring has disappeared forever. The ocean never fears another wave. The sun never questions whether dawn will return. Nature trusts cycles. Human beings often panic because they mistake seasons for permanence. Financial winters arrive. Businesses struggle. Markets decline. Unexpected hardship visits every life. But those who have invested in themselves carry something markets cannot measure: the ability to begin again. And history quietly reminds us that many of the world's greatest fortunes were not built by people who never failed. They were built by people who refused to let failure become their final identity. Late one autumn afternoon, Maya returned to the old harbor where her journey had truly begun. The same lighthouse still stood watch over the sea. The same waves rolled steadily toward the shore. Nearby, a young sailor carefully adjusted his compass before setting sail. She smiled. Years earlier, she would have admired the size of the ship. Now she admired something else entirely: the direction, because she finally understood that destinations are never accidents. They are the natural consequence of countless invisible choices made long before the horizon comes into view. Every disciplined morning, every thoughtful purchase, every hour spent learning, every temptation quietly resisted, every opportunity courageously accepted, every promise faithfully kept, every setback transformed into another lesson. Each one moved the compass only slightly. Together they changed an entire life. As the sun slowly disappeared beneath the horizon, Maya sat on an old wooden bench overlooking the water. She thought about the people who spend their lives chasing wealth as though it lives somewhere beyond the next promotion, the next investment, or the next breakthrough. Then she thought about the mentors who had quietly changed her life. The clockmaker, the gardener, the architect, the bookseller, the violin maker, the professor. Each had offered a different lesson, yet all had been teaching the same truth. Wealth is not a destination waiting somewhere in the future. It is a way of thinking practiced today. It is built every morning we choose growth over comfort. Every afternoon we choose creation over consumption. Every evening we choose learning over distraction. Financial freedom is not one extraordinary decision. It is thousands of ordinary decisions made with extraordinary consistency. Perhaps that is why truly wealthy people often appear remarkably calm. They understand something the world constantly forgets. Money can disappear. Markets can change. Technology can evolve. Entire industries can transform. But a disciplined mind, a generous spirit, a resilient character, and the habit of creating value, these remain. And wherever they remain, new opportunities quietly begin to grow. Before leaving the harbor, Maya opened the old brass compass one final time. Its needle settled gently toward the north. Unhurried, unshaken, faithful to its purpose. She smiled and whispered, "The destination was never the secret. The direction always was." As you close this audiobook, remember this: you do not become wealthy on the day your bank account reaches a certain number. You become wealthy on the day your habits begin creating a future greater than your present. Long before the world recognizes your success, your daily choices have already begun writing it. So guard your attention, protect your energy, create more than you consume, prepare before opportunity arrives. Own what builds tomorrow. Accept responsibility for your direction. Choose people who elevate your vision. Have the courage to begin, and be patient enough to let your efforts compound. If you do these things not perfectly, but consistently, you may discover that the greatest fortune was never something you were trying to acquire. It was someone you were quietly becoming. Because in the end, the richest life is not the one with the most possessions. It is the one that creates the most value, leaves the deepest impact, and inspires others to believe that they, too, can build a future one quiet choice at a time. And like the steady compass pointing faithfully toward the horizon, may your habits guide you not merely toward greater wealth, but toward a life of purpose, freedom, and lasting significance. Epilogue. There is a quiet truth that rarely makes headlines. A wealthy life is not built in moments of excitement. It is built in ordinary mornings, thoughtful afternoons, and peaceful evenings through choices so small they often go unnoticed. One page read, $1 invested, one distraction resisted, one promise kept, one lesson learned, one act of courage repeated again and again. These are the invisible threads from which remarkable lives are woven. If this audiobook leaves you with only one idea, let it be this: your future is not waiting for one extraordinary breakthrough. It is quietly taking shape through the habits you practice today. Years from now, you may not remember every story, every metaphor, or every lesson you've heard. But if you choose to protect your attention, nurture your mind, create more than you consume, and remain patient with the process, the direction of your life will begin to change. And one day, someone may look at your success and call it luck. Only you will know the truth. It was never luck. It was the quiet discipline of choosing, day after day, to become a little wiser than you were yesterday. Thank you for allowing me to share this journey with you. Until our paths cross again, keep learning, keep building, and keep moving steadily toward the life you were always capable of creating. Because the greatest investment you will ever make is the person you become along the way.